If you think your 3D printer or laser engraver is pretty cool, then I think you're going to appreciate this UV ink printer that can print on metal, wood, canvas, plastic, and more in mind-blowing detail. And best of all, it fits right on your desk. This is the EufyMake E1, a compact UV ink printer that's going to change the way that you customize everything. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how it works. I'll walk you through the setup and getting started with the software, what this machine can do, and some of the challenges that I ran into, because from the other videos that I've seen on YouTube, I haven't seen too many people talk about those challenges just yet. And if at any point in this video, you guys are thinking about picking up one of these for your own shop, I'll drop a link in the video description down below where you can go check this out. It's going to be an affiliate link, which I would really appreciate if you guys used, because it would go a long way to supporting this channel at no extra cost to you. So with all that said, let's get started. We'll begin with the unboxing, and as you can see, there's a lot of boxes in this kit. Now in this video, we're going to be mainly covering the main printer, and other modules like the rotary printing attachment and the laminating machine will be covered in future videos, so keep an eye out for those. Unboxing the main printer is pretty straightforward. There's two Velcro straps on the side that you'll undo, and then you can take the entire top of the cardboard box and pull it upwards. There's some foam and other packing materials inside that you can discard, and then you can take the entire printer and just pull it up and out of the box. You can then remove the protective bag, and a lot of the doors and panels are sealed shut with these stickers. So you'll want to remove the stickers and then open the panel doors and start to remove all of the contents that are packed inside of the machine itself. This is where you'll find the accessory box as well as one of the adhesive mats for the mini bed. Attached to the top of the printer, you'll find a sticker which outlines everything that is included in this box, and you'll peel that off to reveal the area in which the ink cartridges are installed. We'll get to the ink cartridges in a moment, but first let's check out what's included inside of this larger cardboard box that was packed behind the printer itself. And this is where you will find the standard flatbed, as well as some getting started instructions. This very large white sheet is the adhesive mat for the standard size bed, and that standard bed module is located right here in the box. We'll attach this later to the machine, but for now we'll just set it aside. And in the smaller accessory box that was packed inside of the printer, this is where you'll find things like the power cable, as well as this charcoal air filter, some basic tools, 3 ceramic fridge magnet samples, as well as some UV goggles that will protect your eyes when you have the doors open and the machine running. There were 2 cartridge kits included in my bundle, and this first kit is the ink cartridge kit. So you'll get all of the various colors like the CMYK as well as white, and you'll get a cleaning cartridge. Now we're ready to start setting up the machine, and on the bottom left hand side you'll find the power receptacle as well as the power button. We can use the power adapter to plug that in and the light should turn green. Then we can start installing the ink cartridges, and in each one of those boxes you'll find some safety instructions, but essentially they just get inserted from the top. You press down, you'll feel a spring-loaded mechanism lock them in place. Now on the right hand side of the machine, this is where you can remove a panel. You're going to remove 4 of those little red plug covers, and then you can simply press in the cleaning cartridge and put the panel back on the side of the printer. Next we can install the air filter, and this is done by opening the door at the front of the machine, removing the panel at the top. You just pull it away. And then we can take our charcoal filter, and there's a label that says facing out. That's going to face to the outside of the machine, and it simply presses in place in that large slot at the front of the machine. We can put the cover back on and close the door, and now we're ready to fire up the app. This is where you'll have to agree to some terms of service that most of us won't read, and then sign into your account or create one if you don't already have an account. The rest of the setup is pretty typical, connecting to Wi-Fi and then enabling Bluetooth access so that it can find the printer and then share your Wi-Fi connection with your E1 printer. The printer then gets associated with or added to your account, at which point you can then rename the machine, and this is useful if you plan on running more than one of these printers. Perhaps you're running a business, and then you'll more than likely get a notification that you need to update the firmware, so you can hit the update button. That only takes a couple minutes and will install over the air. Once you're finished with the firmware update, this is when the machine should self-calibrate, and this is the point at which I started to run into some problems. Now, I received this machine while the Kickstarter campaign was still going on, so technically, I guess this machine that I have is pre-release and there were some bugs to get worked out. The problem that I had seemed to be with the detection of the ink cartridges, so the machine would keep reporting that each of the cartridges couldn't be detected, and I would install them, reinstall them, and then it would just cycle through each of them, giving me an error. This issue also extended to the cleaning cartridge on the side of the machine, and this was very frustrating because obviously I couldn't even get the printer calibrated or get started with this thing for quite a while, but luckily the support team at EufyMake was very responsive. I guess they flagged this as some kind of a bug, and within a day or two, I got a notification of a new firmware update which seemed to solve this problem. And so after the second firmware update, I was off to the races with the device calibration or initialization. And one of the things that it will prompt you to do once you start this process is to install the adhesive mat on the mini flatbed. The printer was smart enough to recognize that I hadn't already done this, so what you need to do is open the front door of the machine, unlock the mini flatbed by sliding the unlock button to the left hand side, and then we're going to grab the small mini adhesive mat from our kit. We're going to leave the white printing side on, and we're going to remove the clear sheet from the bottom, and this will expose a sticky surface that we can use to attach this thing to the mini flatbed. And you'll see there is a chamfered corner. You can line that up with the bottom right hand corner of the mini flatbed, and then we can reinstall it into the printer. Now it should recognize that you have the adhesive mat in place with the white piece of test paper facing up, and then you can move on to injecting the ink, at which point I had another problem where this failed a few times on me. Now I'll be honest, I can't remember if there was another firmware update issued for this issue, but what I do know is that I was in contact with the support team once again, and they did help me rectify this problem. Had nothing to do with the hardware, seemed like it was more on the software side, so at least it was able to get fixed remotely. Now after the ink was finally successfully injected, then we could start off with the first test print. And this is where the app will guide you through some of the basics, which we've already done. And that initial test print will begin, and the app will walk you through what to look for when the test print is complete. And this is where I saw quite a bit of deviation from what the app was telling me I was supposed to see. And I went through the automated print head cleaning process several times and had it reprint the test at least 5 or 6 times with really no improvement. The results of the test print definitely weren't terrible, but they certainly weren't looking exactly what they were supposed to look like. So again, I reached out to the support team and they told me to just ignore it. So if you're seeing this problem, you may be able to do the same thing, ignore it, and then just proceed to trying to print something real instead of just these calibration test prints. So as you can see, I got off to a little bit of a rocky start with this thing during the setup process, but I guess this is part of the nature of pre-release testing, and by the time these units start shipping out to everyone else, they should have these bugs worked out. In a moment, we'll be on to our first real print, but first we'll just very briefly explore some of the app. And you can see on the bottom there's a small menu. We can click that explore button, and this is where we can explore some existing projects that other users have shared, and you can even search this repository of projects. And for example, I'm going to search for magnet because the machine came with those 3 ceramic sample magnets. Now, I didn't personally find anything that I wanted to print inside of that app for now, so I'll be doing my own project, but as more users continue to share their personal projects, you might find some very compelling things to print. Now, getting these 3 ceramic fridge magnets set up inside of the printer is very simple. First, you'll tear away that white cover, and that's going to expose a tacky surface that you can just press the magnets down onto, and there should be enough friction there to hold them in place during the printing process. For my first print job, I'm going to head into the Creative Lab tab at the bottom of the app, and this is where you can find a bunch of AI tools. The intent of these tools seem to be centered around taking a flat, regular image and creating some sort of texture or raised areas to give the print a 2.5D style effect. And in this case, I just selected a family photo, and on the app, you have a little less functionality than on the desktop program, but you can do some basic things like crop your image, and then you can use the AI tools to give your photo a 3D comic effect, or perhaps even change the people into claymation style characters. But honestly, I think some of those AI models need a little bit of work. I played around with them and the human faces looked very odd. So we're gonna skip that and just stick with the original. And then in this screen, this is where we can change the max height that will be artificially added to the image to create some depth. And you can also play around with the slider that adjusts the smoothness, which I'm assuming is the transition between the peaks and valleys of the raised areas. There's a pretty good 3D preview of what the result should look like when it's printed, and you can rotate it around and see it from different angles, and then we can proceed to create this job. In the next screen, we can select the material that we're printing on, and in this case, it's a ceramic magnet. So we're going to click on ceramics. The machine already knows that we have the mini flatbed installed, so we don't have to change that. And I'm going to use the rest of the default settings. And then because this is the first print job, it seems to remind us of some of the basic installation settings for the mini flatbed or the standard flatbed before we can go ahead and proceed with the snapshot. Because this is when the machine is going to measure the materials on that mini flatbed, and it's going to give us a preview of where we want to place our graphic on top of the material. So in this case, you can see I've got all 3 of the fridge magnets set up on there. And now I can take the image that we just worked on using the AI tools, and I can place it directly over top of one of the magnets. Now it doesn't seem like in the app I can copy or paste this image, at least not at this point in time, so I can only do one magnet at a time. Later in the video, we'll look at the desktop application where there's a lot more functionality, and perhaps as time goes on, EufyMake will also modify the phone app to add more functionality, but for now, we'll just go ahead and print one magnet. Since the mini flatbed fits entirely inside of the machine with the doors shut, there really wasn't much to film during this 25-minute process. And even with those doors open, honestly, it's not really that exciting. And at this point, the app will let you rate the print quality, and I suppose that gives some feedback back to the head office at EufyMake. And despite my initial struggles with the printer calibration and setup, it does seem like this thing is printing completely fine. There are no problems at this point with the color. The raised surfaces look very good. And the AI model seemed to do a pretty reasonable job at figuring out which areas the image needed to be raised and brought more to the foreground. For example, my more prominent nose. All kidding aside, I thought this was a very good result, and the only question that you guys might have at this point is why did this take 25 minutes? And this seems to be the nature of adding a lot of height to a print. So it needs to build up all of that ink, and in that last example, I had a max height of 1.5 millimeters. I'm not sure what the exact thickness is of each of the individual passes of the print head, but in some ways, I guess you could imagine this process similar to a regular 3D printer where it's building up the image or the model layer by layer in order to achieve some sort of depth. So I went ahead and played around with this portrait mode a few more times on several of the other sample fridge magnets. And you can see with this one here, I went with less depth. In this case, I think less than a millimeter, and it cut way down on the print time, but you just don't get as much of a raised effect. Now, conversely, with this one, I went a little bit higher, I think up to about 2 millimeters, but something kind of weird happened here with the highlights of the image where the white sections turned a little bit green. The support team said I should just run the printhead through another cleaning process and the color bleed there should go away. So we'll go ahead and do a few more examples and we'll check to make sure that we don't have any further issues with the color. So after an automated printhead cleaning, I went ahead and printed another magnet, and I was happy to see that there were absolutely no issues with the color. And I also printed this one on the left-hand side without the AI model adding any depth. So it's just completely flat, so you can see a side-by-side comparison. And quite frankly, I kind of prefer the one on the left-hand side without the depth because it doesn't matter which angle you're looking at this image, it just looks perfectly fine, whereas the one with the artificial depth can look a little funny at certain angles. Additionally, you may have noticed that while I was using the app, if you enter into the AI tools, you do have a certain number of credits to work with for the AI model generation. Whereas if you just do a flat image like this one, you don't have to use any credits, and it saves a bunch of time as the flat image only took about 4 or 5 minutes to produce. Now we're ready to move on to a slightly bigger project, and EufyMake offers quite a few of these materials, including these iPhone 16 cases. They come in a 4-pack, and inside, once you remove them from all the packaging, you'll find that they are just completely clear. Before printing on these cases, you'll need to peel away the protective film on the top because obviously we don't want to print on top of that. And in order to get this thing mounted to the mini flatbed, I'm going to put the foam back on the inside of the case. I don't think the print head applies very much pressure to anything that it's printing on, but the foam should give the case a little more structure. That foam also conveniently sticks pretty well to the tacky surface of the print bed. However, the phone case can still move around a little bit, so I'm going to take some extra packaging foam and I'm going to put it on the front and back ends of the phone case to prevent it from moving back and forth during the printing process. Now it's quite a bit more secure. And for this project, I'll be completing it using the phone app again. So inside of the app, I'll just click on the green plus button at the bottom, and this is going to give us a blank canvas to work with. The button in the top right beside the mini flatbed dropdown is going to take a snapshot of our work area, and you can see here that we've got the phone case. And an additional advantage of using that foam inside of the phone case is that it makes the phone case look white, which is very easy to see against the black background of the mini flatbed. I've then used the upload button to import an image, and this is actually just a phone background image. I figured it'd be roughly the same height to width ratio as the phone case itself, and I wanted to pick something that was very vibrant and colorful. Using the app, I was very easily able to drag the image around, resize it, and rotate it accordingly. And at the bottom, you'll find inside of this app, there's a bunch of other tools where you can add things like graphics, shapes, text, AI generated content, and there's even some templates where you can work off of some pre-existing layouts. I'm going to keep things simple with just the graphic itself. I'll click print in the top right hand corner of the screen, and then we can select our material. In this case, it's a plastic phone case, and I'm going to leave all of the other parameters default. You'll notice in the ink mode that it says white and then it says CMYK. So essentially, to my understanding, what this means is that it's going to lay down a layer of white, kind of like a primer or a base layer, before getting into the colors. I think this ink mode is primarily useful for printing on darker colored objects, but even for a clear material like this, I think it might be a good idea, so I went ahead with that, and this phone case only took about 8 minutes to produce. I think this is a very reasonable amount of time, considering that I didn't select to generate any sort of texture or depth, so this image is completely flat, and I think it looks amazing. The colors are very vibrant, and all of the details of the image are there. I really wish I had an iPhone 16 so I could actually use this case. What I also thought was really cool about this particular project was that the edges of the phone case are beveled, and the printer didn't seem to have any sort of a problem injecting the ink down far enough on those beveled edges, so you got total coverage across this entire case. If you're running some kind of a personalization business, I think these phone cases would be an absolute no-brainer to sell. Next, I wanted to try printing on a metallic surface, and I've got these anodized aluminum wallets. Now this one here, I've had previously lasered in one of my other videos, but I wasn't really all that crazy about the design, and I figured I could cover it up with the UV ink. I thought this would be a great way to save this wallet so it doesn't end up in the trash bin. Now, one small issue I had was trying to stick the wallet to the mini bed plate, and that's partially because there is some existing ink that's been cured to this plate, and so that adhesive surface isn't working so well anymore. You can go ahead and try and chip some of that off, but there's an easy way to get it to stick, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now, one of the things I also wanted to do was I wanted to just make sure that the ink is really going to stick to this metallic surface, so I cleaned the top with some isopropyl alcohol, and now you can see on the back side of the wallet, the little trick I used to get this to stick to the mini bed plate was just some masking tape folded back over on top of itself, and I also masked off the lever on the wallet so that the ink won't stick to that. Now I can securely stick this down to the bed plate and it should not go anywhere. By the way, those wallets also normally come blank. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that I had previously engraved it. If you guys are looking for those wallets to customize for yourself or your own customers, I'll put a link to them in the video description down below. Now for this job, we're going to be using the desktop version of the EufyMake software. When you launch the software for the first time, you can go ahead and log in using the same credentials that you did with the mobile app, and then you'll see all of your other projects appear in the My Projects section, and the machine that you had linked to your account will also be visible and accessible. We can start a new project by clicking the little plus sign in the top left-hand corner, and this will launch a new canvas. And then we can click on the snapshot button on the right hand side, and the machine will measure the height of our material and give us a nice accurate snapshot of the wallet. Once we've taken our snapshot, underneath the snapshot button, you'll notice there's now a button to hide or show the background. And on the left hand side of the screen, you'll see a toolbar, and the first button in the toolbar is the upload button, where we can upload an image from our computer. And for this project, I've uploaded a picture of this classic Game Boy, and I think you guys know where I'm going with this. So I'll take this image and I'll just crop it down to the Game Boy itself, and then I can resize it to fit entirely over top of the wallet. With the image still selected, at the top toolbar, you'll notice that there's a button for opacity, and I'm just going to dial this down to about 25%, and I find this is very useful for being able to see the workpiece underneath of your graphic so that you can position it and size it to fit just right on top of that wallet. With the graphics selected on the right hand side, you'll also see a few options where you can change the craft mode. So you can change it from flat to flat raised, and then you can change some of those parameters accordingly. When you have all the settings where you want them, in the bottom right hand corner, there's a preview button where you can take a look at a 3D preview of your graphic on top of your workpiece. And in this case, I'm going to go with a very slightly raised image because I'm trying to cover up what's existing on that wallet already. I don't want any of the engraving to show through. So I figure at 0.4 millimeters thickness, that should be more than sufficient to cover up anything underneath. Then I've gone ahead and clicked the print button, and at this point you're brought to another screen where you have, I guess, one last chance to reposition your image. So you can see that I can click on the image, drag it around, resize it in this final printing screen. And this just seems entirely redundant to the previous screen, so I'm not really sure why it exists. But otherwise, in this final screen, you can also change the print settings. So the material I left at custom. Honestly, I had to remember it. I probably would have changed it to metal, but the ink mode I couldn't change because it was already preset to texture because I had selected a raised image. And since there wasn't much else to adjust at this point, I clicked the green Start Printing button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, and over Wi-Fi the job was sent to the printer. You just have to go over to the printer and physically click the button at the top to get the job to start. And a few minutes later, I had a very cool image of that original Game Boy on the one side of the wallet, and I definitely have plans to do the other side if I can find a nice high quality image of one of these classic Game Boys from the back side. One other thing to note is that it successfully covered up completely that original engraving, so under all lighting conditions you can't see it at all. Now that engraving was only taking away that black anodized layer of the wallet, so it's not something that you could even feel with your fingers, but the point is that it's hidden, and this thing completely refreshes this wallet, and now it's a total gem instead of a contender for the trash can. Next up, I wanted to try one of these clear plastic screwdriver cases, and if you guys are looking for a little mini screwdriver, you can find these for sale on my website, embracemaking.com. So go check that out if you want to help support this channel. And for this clear plastic case, I also used the little trick with the masking tape folded back over on top of itself to stick it to the mini flatbed. And the workflow here inside of the desktop app is going to be exactly the same as the previous example. So I've got ahead and first taken the snapshot of the working area. And then on the left hand side, I've used the upload button, and I'm going to be uploading this graphic here. And this is just a variation of my business logo or branding. And one of the things that you'll notice is that it has transparency. So this is a PNG file. And I thought this would be cool to try out because the case is also transparent, so the areas of the image where there is no printing, you'll be able to see right through that and into the screwdriver case. And with this example, other than the transparency, there's really nothing out of the ordinary here. In the print settings, I'm going to select the material as plastic. The ink mode, I'm also going to use the white to CMYK, and the print quality is just going to be standard quality. Up until this point, I know that we've only used that white to CMYK ink mode, but keep watching because later in the video, we're going to try a few of these other settings. After hitting the green Start Print button, on the right hand side, you'll actually see an estimate of the ink volume being used for this job. If you're running a business, this information would be critical to the cost structure for the products that you're producing. And this simple job only took 4 minutes to complete, and I was very happy with the results. But one of the things that I want to draw your attention to that I was particularly happy with this machine is the accuracy of the camera. At this point, I've used a bunch of different laser marking equipment that has come equipped with cameras, and oftentimes they do a good enough job of taking a picture of the workpieces and the work area. But oftentimes things are a little bit off due to the height of the workpieces and the camera perspective. But in this case with the EufyMake E1, the snapshot image representation of the workpieces is exceptional, and this makes the graphic placement very accurate, as you saw with that previous clear cover. It really annoys me when graphics and logos aren't perfectly centered on objects, and nothing makes this more obvious than a logo on a round object. So I've got one of these blank white plastic pop socket phone grips, and these are those things that go on the back of your phone. They pop out and make it easier to hold. And I figured this would be a good test to try and brand something like this with my logo, place it right in the center, at least according to the camera image, and then see how well the position of this logo comes out on the actual object. And oddly, since this was the main focus of this little mini project, one of the things I had noticed is that once I advanced to the final screen before we start printing, I felt like my graphic shifted a little bit from the previous screen. So I took the opportunity to move it around one final time. And with the graphic selected, you can use the arrows on your keyboard to nudge the image around 1 millimeter at a time in the X or the Y. Now, if 1 millimeter is too much, you can use the edit position menu on the right hand side, and you can manually type in the coordinates. This will give you more resolution with your image placement and precise control in terms of its coordinates. At this point, I'll then select the material as plastic, and everything else remains the same as always. Taking a look at the result, one thing that I noticed was that the green glow around the logo didn't show up that well. So I was kind of surprised about that, but the other thing that I noticed was that the graphic placement also wasn't perfect. It looks centered from left to right, but up and down, it does look a touch low. Moments ago, I praised this machine for the positional accuracy of the graphics on that clear rectangular case, but as always, when you're working inside of a round envelope, any sort of misalignment is just more obvious in my opinion. Now that we've pretty thoroughly tested the mini bed, let's move on to using the standard size bed. So to remove the mini bed, you'll just use that lever at the front, push it to the left to unlock it, lift it up and out. Then you'll have to open the rear door of the machine because the larger standard size bed is going to pass all the way through. And on the standard size bed, you'll notice on the one side of this little module at the bottom, there is a electrical connection, and that is going to face the left hand side of the printer. And this rectangular square size module is going to fit into the hole on the carriage inside of the printer. Now, don't entirely let go of this thing because it can still flop around and you don't want it to fall through the back of your machine onto the floor, but you'll get it to seat in there properly on that electrical connector. You can push it all the way to the back, and while holding it down flat, you can use that lever at the front, press that to the right hand side, and lock the standard size bed in place. And I would highly recommend, before locking it into the machine, you apply the adhesive mat and you leave that white test print sheet on top. The printer should recognize the new bed, and if you haven't yet used it or calibrated it, the software will prompt you to do that. And you can select the calibration on the right hand side menu in the desktop software, and the printer will test the cameras, and within a few minutes on your white test print sheet, you'll have a printed pattern, and then you can remove that. And now we'll be moving on to one of my favorite projects with this printer, and that's printing on a canvas. EufyMake also sent me these canvases that come in a 5-pack, and I'm just going to place that right on top of the standard size bed, again with some of that masking tape folded over itself on the bottom to hold it in place. And then I'm going to go through the same workflow as what I did on the mini bed. You're going to start off with taking a snapshot, and this is going to take a little longer than it does on the mini bed because there's just more bed to take a picture of. And then I'm going to import my graphic, and I got a series of these Disney themed pictures off of Etsy that somebody reworked into a poster style of various Disney princesses. If you guys are interested in these, I'll put a link in the video description down below. But the thing I'd like to point out here is that while clicking on the graphic, I'm going to select the ink mode for this particular graphic, and I'm going to skip the white to CMYK, and I'm just going to select the CMYK. So I think in this case, because the canvas is already very white, the printer shouldn't have to lay down a layer of the white ink first. So we'll see how this turns out on the canvas. Then I'll click the print button in the bottom right hand corner, and because this is the first time using the standard size bed, the software will remind you of the maximum height and dimensions that you can use for your materials. But I'll go ahead and skip that because we're well within those dimensions. And in this final menu on the right hand side, I didn't see any option for canvas, so I just left the material as custom and then went ahead and pressed print. And one other thing I want to point out here with this graphic that I purchased from Etsy is that I did edit it in Photoshop, so I removed the white background and made it transparent. Since I knew the canvas was going to be white already, I didn't want the printer laying down and wasting more white ink, and I think it leaves a really cool effect because you can still see the texture of the canvas and it almost seems like these images were painted on. You may have also noticed that I selected the flat mode print, so I didn't add any texture. I didn't want to actually build up any ink in this case because I really didn't want to waste that much ink. But essentially, you could make this look even more like an authentic painting if you had selected some sort of textured mode where the AI model in the software would have interpreted the image and added some texture. And I think that could also look very cool. But again, it's going to take longer and it's going to waste more ink. Each of these photos took about 15 to 20 minutes depending on each of the designs. These canvases were 12 inches by 16 inches, which is roughly 300 millimeters by 400 millimeters. And this is a pretty common size, so I was able to find some awesome white frames. And I really love those pictures, and it's my favorite project in this video. But we are going to move on to something else, which I am seeing a lot of people starting to do with these printers, and that is to UV print on a 3D printed part. So you can see that I've got this black plastic hard shell case that I printed and designed, and the white DJI logo was part of the 3D print. So I didn't do that on this UV printer, but I want to add some additional raised text to the top of this thing. So I've got it set up on the standard size bed. I've gone ahead and taken a snapshot, and I'm going to add my text now. In the previous video clip, you will have seen that I popped open the case, and inside is the DJI Osmo Mobile Gimbal. So I'm going to add Osmo Mobile as the text. Now again, this is a PNG image text. I didn't generate the text inside of the EufyMake software, but you could definitely do that. But either way, in the menu on the right hand side, I had selected the flat raised and I set the text to 0.4 millimeters high. And that's all I had to do, because when you're using the raised mode, it doesn't allow you to select between the white, CMYK, or just the other options in the ink mode. So you only have the one option. And I went ahead and pressed print, and this thing came out looking amazing in my opinion. The ink seems to adhere really well to the plastic 3D printed parts, and it's definitely raised. Now I only selected 0.4 millimeters, so it's not going to be that high, but it is high enough that you can feel it, and you can definitely see it when you look at it from the side. And the other cool thing that I noticed is that the printer seems to add a bevel to the edge of the raised text. This is not something I was able to select or control inside of the software, but it gives it a nice feel where it's not an abrupt change in the height. So I thought that was really cool. Moving on, we're going to try one of these blank puzzles. Now I went to my local craft store and they sell these things, but I'll put a link down in the video description below to some of these puzzles on Amazon, and they're technically intended for sublimation, but I have a feeling the UV ink will stick to these things just fine. So I'll go ahead and place that down on the large standard size bed. I'm going to use a squaring tool there to just make sure that the puzzle is completely square on the bed. If you don't already own one of those, I'll put a link to that tool in the video description down below. They're super handy. They come in handy when you're setting up workpieces with straight edges. Now the workflow here again is going to be very similar. The software is really easy to work with, so I've imported an image and I'll just spend some time cropping it and resizing it to fit precisely on top of that blank puzzle. And if you missed it earlier in the video, I would recommend using that opacity button at the top so you can make your graphic temporarily partially transparent so it's easier to place on top of the object. Now in the ink mode, this time around, I'm going to try the CMYK gloss varnish. And that's because again, the puzzle is white, so I don't think we're going to need to lay down a white base layer. And I find that most puzzles do have some sort of a gloss finish to them, so we'll see how this turns out with a nice gloss finish. In the print settings list for the material, I couldn't find anything that I thought was a better match, so I'm just going to leave it at custom. To be honest, I still don't completely understand what it's doing different in the printing process depending on the material to perhaps make it stick better, but the custom buttons seem to work out for this material and the results came out looking excellent. And if you're running a personalization business, I think this would also be a great seller. I believe Costco used to actually offer these kinds of custom puzzle prints, and I think this would be something that would sell very well if you were to offer it as some kind of personalization service. And finally, just commenting on the gloss finish. To be honest, I think it's more of a semi-gloss than a high gloss finish, but it still looks really good. So as you guys saw at the beginning of this video, I did get off to a little bit of a rocky start with this machine, and I ran into some initial challenges while setting it up. And perhaps that's why you'd seen other people release their videos before me on YouTube. Maybe they didn't run into these problems, but I like to report everything in these product reviews just as I experienced them from start to finish. Now, luckily, the EufyMake customer service was on the ball and they got everything sorted out for me with those firmware updates that I showed you earlier in the video. I received this product pre-release, and at the time of making of this video, it's actually still on Kickstarter, so sometimes that's just how these things go when you get an early release of a product. After that, it's been very much smooth sailing with this UV printer, and all of the prints so far have been looking amazing. When I show people the results, they're very surprised that you can achieve this kind of quality and printing on all sorts of different surfaces with a machine that just fits and sits on your desk, and it's not a piece of industrial equipment. I can't wait to show you guys more results with the rotary attachment and the laminating machine in future videos, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. I was really pleased at how easy it was to use this machine. I had honestly anticipated a much steeper learning curve, but it was very easy. Most of everything is automated, and even in the software, it's as simple as importing your graphic or image and just placing it over your workpiece and pretty much clicking print. There's not a whole lot in terms of options that you can select, so the learning curve is not at all steep and the software is not overwhelming whatsoever. My favorite material to print on so far has been the canvases. It's really incredible to be able to very quickly create vibrant wall art with an image that you've produced, whether it's in Photoshop or Illustrator, or even just something that you found on the internet, and you can just drag it into the EufyMake Studio and slap it on a canvas, and the results look awesome. And as someone who's very much into 3D printing, my second favorite use case for this UV printer is the ability to print on top of my 3D printed parts. It just opens the door to so much more customization and design freedom when it comes to decorating or personalizing those 3D prints that I still can't really even achieve with multi-color or multi-material 3D printing. And third, I love printing family photos on just about anything. It makes making thoughtful and memorable gifts for family members quick and easy. And if you're running some sort of personalization business, I can see it being very popular to print other people's family photos on all sorts of novelty items. And the best part is that even if you're doing an individual or single job, as I showed you earlier in the video, the setup is quick and easy, so your setup cost is going to be very low. As a business owner, the other incredible thing is being able to brand just about anything. So whether you're doing custom plastic cases for your products, custom phone cases, or other promotional items, you can slap your logo on just about anything in a matter of minutes. In terms of criticisms, I would say that the AI models need a little more work. I specifically played around with the portrait mode ones, so I tried to create some cartoon characters as well as claymation models of myself and some family members. And I'll be honest, the results were pretty strange. I definitely didn't want to print them. AI models, as far as I understand, do get better over time as more people use them. So hopefully this will improve in the future, and this is just kind of the nature of it. Also related to the AI functions, you may have noticed earlier in the video that every time I ran an AI model, it took credits away from my account. Now, I'm not a huge fan of these credit systems, but I also understand from the EufyMake perspective that running the models takes compute power, and I'm sure they don't want people abusing this and just running and rerunning jobs all day. So I suppose they have to use a credit system. And as I said, I'm not a huge fan of it, but personally, I don't have a better suggestion, and it just is what it is, it seems. One other thing to be aware of that I haven't seen too many other people talk about is the smell. Now, it's definitely not an intense smell, and the machine does have that fume filter system built into it. But if you've ever done resin 3D printing, you'll find the odor to be familiar. Now, With resin 3D printing, that smell is much more intense and offensive. This thing is very mild in comparison, but you will smell something, and somebody with a sensitive nose will definitely pick up on it. And because the resin 3D printing is also cured with UV light, just like this ink is, that's, I think, why this smell is very familiar. I'm not a chemist, but I would imagine that there is some common chemical between the two that uses UV light to harden it, and that's also what you're smelling. And I don't want to scare anybody off because, again, it's not a very offensive smell, it's not intense, but it is there. And what I would recommend doing is running a secondary HEPA room filter in the room that you have the printer. And I find that this just took the edge off that smell a little bit, at least in my case. And the other thing I want to talk about, but I won't pass judgment on just yet, is the ink usage. So it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly I'll burn through a set of ink cartridges. And when speaking with the reps at EufyMake, I asked them how much it's going to cost for a full set of ink cartridge replacements, and it's going to be a few $100s. So it's definitely not cheap. They did reassure me that they're going to be very frequently throughout the year running all sorts of sales, discounts, and you can buy bundle kits. So it'll take the edge off the full retail price. But at the end of the day, it's still pretty expensive. Now, if you're using it for business purposes, you can very easily absorb that cost because the things that you sell, I think you can command very high prices for. But if you're using it for personal use, I think you might have to be just a little more selective about what you're printing. Overall, I really enjoy using this thing so far, and I think it's going to be a great addition to my 3D printers as well as my laser engravers and cutters. An awesome tool for any maker. And if you guys are looking to pick one up, please use the affiliate link in the video description down below. It won't cost you anything extra, and it goes a long way to supporting this channel. Additionally, if you appreciate this content, please hit that like button, consider subscribing so you don't miss those upcoming videos that I told you about, where I'm going to be taking on the rotary attachment as well as the laminating tool that came with this thing. And if you guys happen to have any questions, put them in the comment section down below. Hopefully I can answer those for you. And as always, thanks for watching. See you guys in some upcoming videos.